And to Kenya now. The government says refugees living in urban areas must leave the country. That's according to some media reports, although they've not yet been confirmed. Now, according to these reports, the announcement was made by an official from the Ministry of Interior. Kenya is also, of course, shutting down the world's largest refugee camp, Dadaab, in November. Hundreds of thousands of refugees will be affected. The UN had previously called on Kenya to reconsider the move, but Nairobi says the camps pose a security threat. It's still not clear at this stage to what extent refugees in urban areas will be affected. Many refugees move from the camps to cities due to inadequate humanitarian assistance. Well, CCTV's Jane Keogh has been following this story for us throughout the day, and she joins me now here in our Nairobi studios. Jane, of course, we know that you've been seeking clarity from the Kenyan government on its statement regarding urban refugees. What have you managed to find out?
Well, Lindy, like you mentioned there, it's really not clear whether the statement actually refers or affects all refugees in Kenya or just the ones in Dadaab that is expected to be closed in November. And like you know, a vast majority of those refugees in Dadaab are from Somalia. Now, this was from Somalia rather, and this was a statement that was made by the chairman of the repatriation committee. This is the team that was mandated to set up a timeline, sort of come up with a plan in terms of logistics of how, as to how the government of Kenya will go about repatriating these people, 350,000 refugees back into Somalia. But again, the statement by the chairman of the repatriation committee doesn't really say as to how the Kenyan government will go about registering these urban refugees back into the camps. And if this is confirmed, again, this is another complicated process because, as you know, a vast majority of these refugees have also been integrated in the communities. They are running businesses. Some of them are going to school. Some of them have actually been born outside the camps in some of these urban centers. And even at this moment, we still don't know if the government really has any kind of statistics as to how many refugees they are talking about that they expect to be registered back into the camps. But again, looking at it from the government of Kenya, perhaps this is still another statement that it's serious or it's not about to let go or calm down in terms of how it's expected to deal with refugees in the future.
Well, looking at the repatriation process, as you say that, 350,000 people within the camps, scores more in urban areas. Is this a realistic deadline as far as the repatriation process back to Somalia is concerned?
Well, Lindy, up until 2 days ago, and this was on Monday during the World Refugees Day celebrations, the government of Kenya was still adamant. It was still maintaining that November deadline, it has to be met. And maybe that's why even officials are making some of these statements. And just last week, if you remember, President Uhuru did meet with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who appeared to support the repatriation process, but again said it must be done in a humane way. But again, there's so many things to come into all this. We are talking about ensuring that these refugees, wherever it is they're taken, remember officials have said they've actually identified about 9 regions in southern Somalia where these people can actually go back to. But again, it has to bring up several issues in terms of access. It's not about security, but accessibility to basic services. We're talking about healthcare, about education. How are these people going to make a living? And so there's so much to come into this whole process in such a complex issue. And whether this is enough, the government saying we've identified 9 places, 9 regions where these people can go back to, whether this is enough to convince these people that it's actually safe to go back home is another question altogether. But the government has not, again, really come up with a modality or a plan as to how they will go about this process in November. There was a team, the repatriation committee gave its final report about last month to the government. We're not sure whether the president has received this report. What we know, it has not been made public yet. But we are also hearing the final details of this repatriation will also be discussed during next month's UN Conference on Trade and Development. And Lindy, imagine it's not really a cheap process. It's going to cost about $11 billion, and so far only 720 million has been raised.
Well, certainly a costly and complex issue for both Kenya and Somalia. Thanks very much to CCTV's Jane Keogh, live with us here in our Nairobi studio.